welcome also to those listening on Independence Live channel. Your contribution will be added to everyone else's in this room. It's very exciting that we can do that nowadays. Without too much ado, we'll get down to the evening's proceedings. But before we do that, I want you to keep in mind one thing about the purpose of this evening. I want you to cast yourself into a not too distant future. Tonight is not about wondering whether or not Scotland should be an independent country. Tonight is about when Scotland is an independent country. When we are independent, we will, of course, need to establish the financial institutions of any normal country. And we have an amazing opportunity before us to redefine what these financial institutions should look like. And we have on our panel this evening 4 business people and experts in their field who have thought deeply about how this country could look if the financial institutions that we are given work for us, for all of us, and not just for those at the top of the tree. So without further ado, we're going to begin with a 10-minute interview with each of the panellists, and we'll begin with Roger Mullen. Roger is the former SNP MP for Kirkcaldy and Cowdenbeath. He is honorary professor at the University of Stirling and founding director of Momentous Change Limited. He has undertaken 29 international assignments for various United Nations agencies and governments. He was a member of the Growth Commission team and co-author of A Stock Exchange for Scotland. So Roger, through your business, Momentous Change Limited, you produced a report entitled A Stock Exchange for Scotland. What are the advantages of having a stock exchange of our own?
Right, well, first of all, thank you very much for the introduction. When you were announcing it, I was wondering who was coming along this evening. But, and let me say that I feel as if I've drawn the short straw, because I know that I'm going to get asked lots of technical questions, and I just can't think of any jokes about stock exchanges. So, but
sorry, we've got a comedy act coming later.
I know him only too well. The first time I was in conversation with the entrepreneur by the name of Thomas Carruthers, whose idea was to create a stock exchange, it immediately struck me that this is going to be a great thing for Scotland. I'll explain why in a moment, but let me make clear at the outset that the stock exchange is not a move by people because of political affiliations. You know, this is supported by people from many different political parties, and it is best that it's like that. But from my perspective, it's going to be part of the infrastructure that we need as we move towards the future, and it will be enormously helpful. I think the question was basically what do stock exchanges do and what will be helpful. One of the things that people sometimes talk about, I'll try and not make this too technical, is what they call capital markets. The way in which money becomes available, particularly for businesses like small businesses, to invest and through that create jobs and improve people's lives. And the way in which people in Scotland in business have predominantly, over the last 40 or more years, had to rely on getting money from investment is what's called debt finance. That is, predominantly, they've had to borrow money from banks and pay it back. Okay? Some people have run businesses and they've managed to get others of the type that you would see in Dragon's Den, who invest in what's called private equity. In other words, the individual takes some shares in the business, but it's done at a very private level. What Scotland has not had available to itself from a means within Scotland is what's called a public equity market. market. That is, allowing individuals like you and me, through a Scottish-based stock exchange, to buy shares in companies. The route by which companies may choose to go public normally involves them, at the moment, in having to go through one of the London exchanges. It is very expensive for them to do so. It is a cumbersome process. It also means, say my company, along with Michel Momentous Change, became big enough that we wanted to float, as they call it, we would have to effectively sack our Scottish accountants, our Scottish legal advisors and the like, because we would have to undertake those determined by the Stock Exchange in London. So it has been something that has disadvantaged the Scottish businesses, and many of them who could have floated have chosen not to do so. And one of the things that has happened because of that is that a lot of successful businesses that have grown in Scotland have chosen eventually to sell rather than to float. And that's the way in which entrepreneurs are able to, for example, take some money out of a business so that they've got that money available to invest and start up other businesses. Taking down the route of selling has meant that we have lost, year after year, the headquarters of what were originally constructed to be Scottish businesses. Now, there is a business in Scotland that Michel in particular, and myself know pretty well, who decided eventually to float on one of the London stock exchanges comparatively recently. And they were able to keep control because they had a majority of the shareholding, but sold other shares on the public markets and managed to raise enough to pay off all of their banking debt and also have a substantial sum of money left by which to invest and expand their business. But very few have been taking that route. So one of the great advantages is it will give businesses, if they choose, another way of raising finance. It would give them another way of getting finance that's not dependent upon them having to lose control by selling their business. And it's not dependent on being at the mercy of banks for debt. So in that way, it gives lots of advantages. Thank you.
Now, from this report, you've also written that, I'll give you a wee quote here.
She's read it.
I have. You've no idea the number of reports I've read in the past few days. So, a little quote. From nothing in 1990, China now has 3 functioning stock markets, all serving different purposes. The stock exchange for Scotland need not compete with London. It can complement it and at the same time serve Scottish companies directly. Please can you explain how we can achieve that, not be in competition?
Well, because the intentions are different from the way in which the London exchanges operate. The entrepreneur who's leading this is passionate about trying to do the right thing, passionate about ethical financing, and passionate in particular about trying to help the planet, for example, in meeting our climate needs and the like. So that this planned Scottish Stock Exchange is going to be unique in the world. When companies come to what they call list on a business so that they can share and trade their shares, they have to go through, quite rightly, an awful lot of financial hoops to demonstrate that they are ready and fit to do so. What is intended in Scotland is that they're going to also have to demonstrate that the way in which they're behaving as a business has a positive social and environmental impact. And they're going to have to report on that every year. So what's going to happen is that people who are going to be given access as businesses are going to have to demonstrate in some way, not just that they're not doing something bad, it's not just about avoiding harm, but their business is contributing in some purposeful way to social and wider impact, meeting what's called the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which actually goes far beyond just the environment. Now, some people have said, won't this deter people from enlisting? One of the things that's interesting, Michelle and myself ran an event in March in Edinburgh, Royal Botanic Gardens, and Thomas Carruthers, in addressing, pointed out that at that time, long before the doors opened, there was already discussions going on with, Michelle, correct me if I'm wrong here, 2 companies in Australia, 2 in Canada, 2 in the United States, 1 in South Africa, all keen to look at the possibility of listing here. Why? Precisely because it had those standards attached to it. They wanted to have the badge of raising finance and operating their business, but being seen to do so in a way that is sensitive to the needs of society and to our planet.
So can I just interrupt you there? Can I ask a question? Are you suggesting, I mean, there are plenty of people in the Yes movement here that want to get away from neoliberalism and capitalism. And are you then suggesting that the stock exchange, which is an iconic symbol of the capitalist system, can actually work to achieve ethical, sustainable, compassionate and egalitarian business practices?
Right, well, let me pick up on something you said in the opening lecture and the way in which you describe it, because you mentioned one of my pet hate words and phrases,
Okay.
right, which you will never find in any of my speeches passing my lips, right? And that is the phrase neoliberal, which is used by many people in an accusatory kind of way. Why don't I like that? Well, if you take it, for example, from an economic perspective, there are different schools of thought. Like you get classical economics, neoclassical economics, the Austrian school of economics and such like. Neoliberalism is not a school of thought. And it is described differently by different groups. You couldn't point to me to one school of thought in the world that describes itself proudly as we are the neoliberals. And it's criticised from people from the left, and it's criticised from people from the right. So I don't think it's a useful phrase at all. I think it's a lazy phrase. People should be more precise in what they're talking about. But you asked something that's really interesting to me when you went on to say, can you operate ethically? Can you operate effectively in the interests of society by having a stock exchange? I would argue passionately, absolutely yes. I've been interested for many years in ethics. I used to teach a bit at university about ethics. And broadly, there are 2 schools of ethics. There are ethics that are about following the rules. You will see this when people talk about regulation in banks or whatever. It's about, are you following the rules of the game? This goes by the fancy name of deontological ethics, as you will know. You then get broadly another school of ethics, and that's the ethics that goes by the name of consequentialist, and as its name would suggest, it thinks more that we judge ethics not by are you following the rules, but by do you do good in terms of your outcome? What are the consequences of your action? What this stock exchange is going to do is to say what we want to do is consider and engage businesses and measure them by the consequences of their actions on the planet and on society. So I think at its heart, the stock exchange will be highly ethical in that regard and able to be held to account. It also wants to have very high standards of governance. That is, it wants to be open and transparent, and businesses that want to engage with it will have to similarly be open and transparent in the way in which they operate. The other thing I would say is I've got to be quickly, is it provides an opportunity that's denied to the people in this hall at the moment, and that is to more easily go out and be able to invest in Scottish businesses and help grow our economy. Isn't that a good thing?
Yeah.
I'm very sorry to have to cut you short there. I had 9 questions prepared and we only got through 3 of them. So guys, get scribbling so that I have a chance to ask some more questions of Roger. But because we're already a little behind time because of the mic issue, we're going to just charge right on ahead. And this time I'm going to invite Rosemary Hunter to answer some questions. Rosemary, after studying economic history at Edinburgh University, has spent most of the last 30 years in financial services as a chartered financial planner and in business development. Over the last 2 years, she has spent time in the third sector and is currently in the process of setting up a zero-waste, plastic-free shop as a social enterprise, in the firm belief that the circular economy is the way forward. So, Rosemary, you we better. Oh, you want to switch that one on? You're going to move that one over there. You've now declared yourself the champion of ethics on this panel, but you have run a self-employed independent financial advice business and mortgage shop for over 20 years. What conclusions has this helped you come to in respect of our current UK financial setup?
Yeah, well, again, if I could echo Roger and say thanks for inviting me along. It's great to see you all here to be thinking about a future independent economy. I have worked for a long time in financial services. I've dealt with a wide range of clients, a lot of people perhaps on the first rung of the ladder who were just setting out, right up to people who were running businesses and making quite a lot of money with those, and trying to help them structure their future, look at future planning, working out what they could do with their money moving forward. Of course, part of the time that I was working in that was the financial crisis that I'm sure we were all affected by in one way or the other. And I think at that point, it became really clear that we had severe problems with our structures, largely created by Gordon Brown, who deregulated the market before the 2008 crisis. Deregulation, I'm sure most of us in the room, I don't want to be rude, but I'm sure most of you remember things used to be mainly building society led. So you would have your building society account, you put your savings in, and then people could borrow against the strength of that that money that they held in that society. Only banks could borrow the money to lend you. With deregulation, that coin flipped, and many people made money when building societies deregulated. But it was the whole thought process behind that, where we started to gear up, people started to borrow, and I saw that really markedly. You saw people who were making lots of money from that because they could gear up, they could borrow on properties, and they could keep buying more and more properties, but other people who were getting into severe financial debt. And one of the key things for me that remains, and mortgage rates have been low for 12 years, we've been under 1%, or longer perhaps, but and that often is beneficial for the people who could afford a mortgage in the first place, but where you had people borrowing on Visa or MasterCard, they're paying 20%, 30% APR rates, so you're really almost never able to repay that debt. And so we created, in the lead up to 2008, we created that debt culture, and I saw the impact that has had on a lot of people. People now are still struggling, and it's had a severe impact on how we've moved from 2008 to today. We supposedly tightened our regulation. We moved to the Financial Conduct Authority and the Prudential Regulation Authority, and they were supposed to tighten things up. But unlike Iceland, we didn't jail any bankers for making a mistake. Some of them got knighthoods. So here, you ruin everyone's life and become a sir. So, for me, I don't think we have tackled that correctly, and I think an independent Scotland is an opportunity, a really massive opportunity, to switch that round, to think about how we could regulate more successfully. And I love the idea that Roger's talking about ethical. When I first started out in 1989, there was one ethical fund in the whole of the UK that a layperson could invest in, the Stewardship Fund, and really it was the tree huggers and the hippies that wanted to go into that. And if I was advising those people, often I'd be saying, oh, well, this is ethical, but you won't make the same return, because typically it didn't make the same return.
So can I ask you then, can you see a role for the Scottish National Investment Bank in playing its part in the redistribution or the more equal distribution of wealth in Scotland, and how can you see that?
Yeah, so again, I think another key thing that happens in the banking system is that we went for quantitative easing. So literally printing money. And I sat in a seminar with JP Morgan where the guy was explaining this to me. I hadn't understood it at this point. It was, I think, 2000. It was literally after the crisis. And I'm like, what, you just print money and that, that's it? Yes. And supposedly you're buying back gilts. The government are buying back the gilts. And the basis of us doing that in the UK was in order for the banks to then lend to people. But of course they didn't lend to anyone. They shored up their own reserves. If we have our own national investment bank, we can ensure that people who need to be lent the money have access to those funds, and I think that's really, really important. I'm a massive fan of the third sector, the circular economy, not-for-profit organisations, so that money isn't stripped out for shareholders. Sorry, I forgot it. Maybe we can build it into our stock exchange. But that way you're recreating and you're redeveloping, the money is going back to something positive, something socially concrete and ethical. If we can combine the two, that would be even better.
You're well known as an activist for the Women for Independence group. How can you see this new banking system that you're describing and aspire to specifically helping women in an independent Scotland?
Yeah, I think there's so much production in the traditional sense is looked at financially, and yet women are so responsible for so many unpaid, or things that are deemed to be unpaid work. So looking after elderly parents, in the majority of cases women who are responsible for looking after older people, looking after children, maybe taking the part-time job rather than a full-time job. So I think from that point of view, again, an opportunity to think differently about how we value people's time and value what they're doing as a job. And for me, I'm a massive advocate of the universal basic income. I think there's a lot of work to be done on this. There has been several studies recently. Finland, one of the most well-known outcomes from their study was that mental health was massively improved. Now we know in Scotland and the UK as a whole, mental health is a massive issue. There's lots of problems, and it's very difficult to keep up with support that's required for that. But what happened in Finland was people weren't having to fill in ridiculous 50-page job seekers allowance forms or whatever. They were given a certain amount of money to live on, and they could choose to spend that how they wanted.
But doesn't that just mean that everyone just puts their feet up and does nothing?
Well, I think that would be what people think, but it's not what the evidence suggests. So you have, again in Finland, you have people who perhaps were so busy filling in forms before in order to get enough just to live on, are then able to choose how they spend their time, and a lot of people went into voluntary work. And for some people, if they are looking to get on the job ladder and they haven't been on that before, it gives them a really valuable experience. So they're gaining experience, they're valuing themselves, and again, from a mental health point of view, that's really beneficial. And actually, I think the Finnish study, in fact, said that the number of people working was almost identical. It didn't go down or up, so it wasn't a roaring success and more people took work, but it was about equal. So, yeah, no, I don't think so.
I don't think so either. I had to ask the question. So time's rolling on, and that unfortunately brings to an end our second allocation of 10 minutes. But it should hopefully have inspired people in the room to start thinking about questions and to write them down, because after the next two interviews, we will then move on to questions from the room and from the live broadcast. So now we're just going to have a little bit of technical issue as we move this microphone over. And we're going, are you going to do musical chairs? No, you're going to give me that microphone. So we're going to pass that microphone to Ian. Oh, no, look, here it is. It's right here. I've got one and you've got one.
All right, okay. It's very quaint for people to think I need a microphone. It's never happened before.
So, Ian, be quiet while I introduce you. Ian Lawson is the King of Estonia. Maybe. Right, so he certainly has many business interests in Estonia. He has first-hand experience of a country moving to independence and adopting their own currency. Until recently, Ian was, to give him his correct title, the Estonian Honorary Consul for Scotland. In Scotland and for Scotland. So, Ian then, very first question. Is that a real thing, that title? And how did you come by it?
Well, it's a very real title. There's lots of honorary consuls for various countries in Scotland these days. It didn't used to be. Most of them have appeared since we got our own Scottish Parliament. And all of a sudden it's a good idea, and countries elsewhere in the world want to have relations with Scotland. So if they, like Estonia, a small country, and can't afford to have paid consuls all over the world, they appoint someone like myself that had showed a commitment to Estonia over a number of years. I don't think this mic's working.
Let me pass that over to you.
I think it's on the end of the spectrum. No, I think, a lot of people, a lot of countries now have their own honorary consuls here in Scotland. Estonia now has two since I retired, which I think is a compliment. Two to replace me. But I live 6 months to a year in America now, so in Florida, so they had to get someone in at that point. How did I become the consul? A lot of people work very hard to become a consul for a country. I didn't. I went to a football match there in 1993. It was an extremely poor country when I went there. The average wage was $40 a month. We stayed in tourist hotel in Tallinn. I slept in the first morning, came down for my breakfast, and the girl apologised. He said, "Sorry, Mr. Lawson, you're too late for the breakfast. You can go to the restaurant, but you'll have to pay." So I went in, got 2 boiled eggs, 2 slices of toast, and a cup of tea. And she came with the bill, and it was 7p. So I got on the lift and up to the 17th floor where we were staying, knocked everyone's door and said, "Listen lads, it's not absolutely crucial. We make breakfast every morning."
Sorry, I just wanted to interrupt you there. And you described Estonia as a poor country. And that's what I knew it as a poor Baltic, in probably more ways than one country, nothing like us politically or economically. So what could we possibly have to learn from Estonia and its adoption of currency?
Well, it's less than 30 years since Estonia got its independence. It's now a member of the EU. It's widely regarded as the most digitally advanced country in the world. The only reason you need to go out in Estonia is if you want to get married. Everything else you can do from your home. 99.9% of all local and national government services are available online. In Estonia, they've been able to park using their mobile phones since the middle of the 1990s. They can vote from anywhere in the world electronically. An Estonian on holiday anywhere in the world can access, if he falls ill, the hospital can access his health records instantly. They can order a prescription online, you can order an ambulance online, they have e-justice. If you're a parent, you can look any night at how your child's doing, because all the work of your child is available online, along with the teacher's comments. There's even a folder where they can store for later on in life their best work at each age. The kid can never come home and say, I can't do my homework tonight because I forgot to bring my book home with me. Because every book in the curriculum's online, and the parent just turns around and says, what page do you want? And there it is, so, quite remarkable. And I'll give you some other examples. If you move house, you just go online, put your new address in, and the system checks your name in every file the government holds for you, and all the utility companies, and the telephone companies, and updates your information with that, on all these files with that one move.
Can I interrupt you? I know two good things about Estonia. They have universal health care and free education. So we have some things in common. We also, perhaps some of us in the room, aspire to having our own currency in Scotland. What can we learn? Is it worth it? Why do we need it? What's the point of it?
Well, Estonia became independent in August 1991, and they introduced the new currency in June 92. Nobody was arguing you wait 5 years or 10 years, any of the kind. They recognised that in this period that follows independence, the Estonians called it the period of extraordinary politics, where there's an expectation of change amongst the whole population, and the resistance to that change is at its lowest point. So that's why a night like tonight is a great idea, because what we should be doing in Scotland is not just trying to decide how do we win our independence. We need to have a plan. What are we going to do on day one when we get that independence to maximise that opportunity? And we can learn. And we don't need to invent it. We can learn a lot of it from countries that have had to go through this. Why do we need our own currency? Probably for the same reason that 172 other countries in the world thought that was the best way forward. It should not be our job here in Scotland to explain why we need our own currency. It should be the job of unionism to explain why we supposedly, uniquely, can't manage to do it.
But the Sustainable Growth Commission advises against a new currency in the short to medium term, and they say the changeover is risky and complicated. There are these 6 tests that the Scottish Government would advocate, or the Scottish National Party. Should get my
let me explain what I think is going on. Roger's on that growth commission. He's a great friend of mine. We've been absolute buddies since the first time we met, a long time ago.
You didn't write that bit.
And I know that Roger wouldn't do anything against Scotland's best interests. Now, I think it is very much against our own interests not to have a currency much quicker than what's being outlined by them. And I've been racking my brain. At the start, I was very angry, and I spoke out quite angrily about what was going on. But since then, I've quietened down a wee bit. And I think I've quietened down because I think I've rumbled what's going on. I think what the big fear is, and these are all very clever economists, much better than me, but I think some of them at least, they are there to help Scotland by all means, but they've also got reputations to protect. And what I think they're worried about is if the polls are showing Scotland moving towards independence, and our very wealthy economy coming out a pound that's in enormous trouble already with huge debt, the pound might crash. And I think the fear amongst the SNP leadership is that we might find ourselves in the middle of a referendum with the pound crashing around us, and the entire English media pointing this out and saying it's her fault. And that's what I think is going on. But how ironic that I'm saying that, I'm saying, well, I don't know what we're going to do about that, at the same time as these people down south are calling me a subsidy junkie. How ridiculous can we end up in a situation like that? And what the other problem I think is, if I can work it out from my wee house in Paisley running my businesses in a few countries, the people that operate these financial markets can work it out as well. And I don't think it's credible. Because I don't think people in the financial markets believe that a country like Scotland, with all the natural resources that we've got, with the talents of our people, are going to voluntarily spend 5 or 10 years tied to a country down south that doesn't care for us, and that's the reason we've got to be free in the first place. And why should we?
Would we not peg our currency to the pound? And if not,
Well, I mean, we could peg our currency. I mean, Scotland's in a pretty good position because, you know, we have a balance of trade surplus. A lot of countries don't have that. We earn enormous amounts of foreign currency. All the oil is sold in dollars, for a start. But we've got whisky, which is one of the biggest foreign for any European country. We've got a massive, successful food and drink industry. We've got fantastic tourism. The big problem of having a currency is can you back it up with sufficient foreign currency reserves? Scotland can do that in spades. We don't have a foreign currency problem. We earn a lot of foreign currency all the time. So that's usually the biggest hurdle for a country that wants to set up its own currency. Why do you want to have your own currency? Because it gives you far more control over your economy. If we are tied through the pound, then if there's a problem with the London housing market, as an example, the Bank of England will change interest rates to cure whatever that problem is. It will have absolutely nothing to do with how the economy in Scotland's going. All our businesses will be controlled by that factor. It has absolutely no relationship to what might be happening in Scotland at the time. So I think we've got to be quite determined here in Scotland and decide, you know, are we going for independence? What's the best way to do it? What do we need to do when we get in? How do we bring the maximum number of Scots and people living in Scotland, I mean that, but I say Scots, how do we bring the maximum number of them in with us? Well, one of the things that I think we need to do, we must change the argument. All these scare stories, we should be forcing them to explain why it's a scare, but it's not a scare for anyone else, anywhere else in Europe.
Finally, and very quickly, can you just explain how difficult it was for Estonia to move to their own currency?
It took a fortnight. And to this day, when we joined the euro, they changed over to the euro, and to this day, you know, dozens of years, well, 2011, so what, 8-9 years later, if you suddenly find your granny stuffed thousands and thousands of Estonian kroons in the mattress, and you discover them, you can still take them to the bank today, put them across the counter, and you will be paid out in euros at the exchange rate at the time. So it's a very, I mean, I was running a business there that I took over the state pest control from the government. It's a fairly sizable business in Estonia. I didn't notice. Out 2 nights, the girls in the office changed all the prices, you know, into euros, and out went the next day, and that was it. The bank transferred any balances you had at the agreed fixed rate. There was really no great problem. And I mean, this is just another example of the scaremongering that goes on. If you go to any of these Eastern European countries that opened up their own currency, none of it was a problem for anyone.
I think the average time is 3 weeks
There you
for
go.
all of them. So, thank you very much.
That's all.
Thank you. And finally, in a position of her own choosing, last but definitely not least, we have Michelle Thompson. Michelle has a background in financial services, IT, property, and the creative sector. She was a key member of Parliament, serving on the Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy Select Committee. Since stepping down from Westminster, she has been appointed as an ambassador and lead for the all-party parliamentary group for fair business banking. Michelle.
And this time, most of you are going, oh no, she's going to be talking about banking. The reason I asked to go last is I have to just tell this funny story against my good friend and business partner, Roger. When we discussed with Alicia who was going to talk about what, Roger said, I'll speak about the stock exchange. Alicia, are you aware Michelle's an expert in banking and she'd love to talk about that? Thanks, Roger. And of course, the truth is, I'm not an expert in anything, and I'm certainly not an expert in banking. I've just picked up a bit of knowledge along the way. I thought I would just tell you a wee bit more about my thoughts about banking. And fundamentally, I suppose it could be summed up. Do you want to ask me a question?
No, you go ahead. Don't worry about the questions. Carry on.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, will I ask you what you're going to answer?
You answer any question that you think I should have asked you.
We'll just break all the rules, I think. One of the things we talked about, Lucy and I, is I had made a comment in a magazine that I wrote for, and I'd said that I believe trust will never be restored in banks until the societal purpose of banking is reimagined. At the very least, we should explain that the results of an action do no unjust harm. And this was, the gist of this was an article I'd read in a magazine, and I feel as though we've lost sight of fundamentally what banking is about. We all understand the kind of concept of retail banking, about how it protects our money and we can transact it and so on, but we seem to, in the UK, fundamentally have inherently lost sight that banks and the banking system exist to serve our society and the good that is in that, and help and support our young people, rather than the other way around as it is at the moment, where every element of our society exists to serve the banks. So much so, as Rosemary mentioned, post-2008, we propped up the banks, and yet in propping up the banks, we continue to allow them to behave extraordinarily badly in the way they've treated some, in particular, small businesses. So trust is such an important part in our society, and it's even more important, I'd argue, in terms of our financial systems, because we all have an emotional connection with money, and money around us as human beings often defines for many people who they imagine they are. And yet trust in banks has never really been restored since 2008.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
You referred to the breakdown in trust, and one of the many banking scandals that has hit us in recent years was that one where RBS was discovered to have deliberately wrecked small businesses in order to make profit. How do we prevent such a thing happening in an independent Scotland?
That's a big question. At the moment, the banks, and again, Rosemary touched on it earlier, we have regulatory bodies and they change their names sometimes, but they don't really seem to ever develop any teeth. And when I was in Westminster, I used to use this phrase, that there was a revolving door of corruption. And the revolving door of corruption I meant was between government, the UK government, and between the regulators and between the banks. And you look at what happened, so for example, some people left government, and then they immediately are employed by large banks. And there is therefore no means and no mechanism to really stop some of the ways that the banks behave. So there's a whole manner of things. It's not simply about regulation. I would argue it's actually an issue of culture. And that is one of the big things we've seen, and again going back to Rosalind's point about post-2008, that where suddenly the creation and consumption was just the eternal driver with ridiculous levels of leverage and so on. And there seems to be no proper control over the banks, and I actually would gently suggest it's worse than what you were saying, what happened to some small businesses. I would make the case that the UK government and the regulators were complicit in what happened post-2008, particularly with RBS, because by then, and perhaps I should explain what the bank did if people don't know about it, there's evidence to suggest that the RBS, in wanting to so-called shore up their balance sheets, would identify businesses that had lots of assets. They would create a set of circumstances that made it very difficult for the business to service what loans they had, and then they would call in their loan. And sometimes they did that at hours' notice. Sometimes they would do it, say, can we have everything repaid by tomorrow morning? And of course, the business was unable to do that. They would then call everything in, they would then sequestrate them, the Scottish term for bankrupt them, and then they would take all their assets. But behind the scenes, there's evidence that that was a way of recapitalising the bank balance sheet, RBS's balance sheet, by doing that. And there are literally thousands of businesses that have been affected in a variety of ways across all the banks.
We've scared lots of people now, but some people in our audience may own or work for small businesses. And you yourselves, you run a small business in momentous change. So what would your advice be for businesses to be aware of in dealing with banks at the present time?
Be very cautious, I would say. Most small business owners are unaware, either many of them will run with an overdraft, that's pretty common, many of them will have some kind of lending, small business lending. In both those situations, it's entirely possible for a bank to demand that is repaid at very short notice, sometimes the next day. And where people have loans, they might imagine, you might hear them saying, but surely that wouldn't happen because I've never missed a payment. I've got cash on deposit, it just makes my life more easy if I manage it in that way. No, actually the situation exists that banks can call in a loan like that. So I would always be very cautious. Then, and I'm amazed we haven't got on to the word tonight, the B word, as people have started to refer to it. Roger and I, as part of Momentous Change, did some research into Brexit and Scottish business, which you can download from our website. And there was a number of things we commented in on it, but one of the things we realised was that many business owners weren't preparing for some of the implications of Brexit. Banks, however, were preparing a great deal, not ironically enough for their customers, but for themselves as businesses. And they were starting to look at their balance sheets and saying, where are the risks? And potentially identifying areas where if something went terribly wrong, and we're not by no way out of the woods yet in terms of the potential for so-called hard Brexit. And we wondered whether that could lead to the situation again where banks have to make sure that they shore up their balance sheets and have more liquidity shown, that yet again they could then say, let's pull some loans in, because they're able to. So I would say be very cautious. I don't want to kind of make people terribly fearful, but through the work I've done in this all-party parliamentary group that is trying to change some of the banking behaviours, the situation hasn't changed so much that a same set of circumstances wouldn't occur again.
And to provide a little bit of optimism then, I'm going to just push you slightly more into a little bit about banks and just ask you about the future of the Scottish National Investment Bank, which is in the pipeline. It's on its way. £2 billion have been set aside for it to be established. How can you see this helping small businesses in Scotland? Or should I ask someone?
Roger's the young man about the Scottish National Investment
And that's why they're business partners, ladies and gentlemen. I'm just going to very quickly pass the mic and then we'll draw the, oh, that's interview to a close, sorry.
Well, I'm hugely supportive of the Scottish National Investment Bank because it will enable more money to be available both for what's called debt finance and also for private equity than is currently available. It will mean that it will be possible to establish it in such a way that it satisfies proper standards so that it protects society and it protects the businesses so that they're not subjected to the kind of behaviour that Michelle has talked about. And I think, what I talked about earlier, this stock exchange and the coming of the Scottish National Investment Bank, although they're doing different things, they're highly complementary. They help improve significantly Scotland's access to what's called capital markets, which should help investment and help grow our economies. These are examples of things that we don't need to wait for independence to do. We can get on with establishing an infrastructure that can help us now, but will be a particular help once we transition to independence.
Thank you, Michelle. So that slightly draws to a close the sort of interview stage, although I've got tons of questions that I want to ask myself. We are now, I think if we stick to the agenda, we're going to have a few minutes while we collate and gather the written questions and sort them out. And then I'll direct traffic, read out the questions and invite various panel members to respond to that. So just a wee pause for 10 minutes. Seconds into the Women's World Cup, and the commentator has already mentioned that England's men won it in 1966. Right. Okay, well, we'll start again. We have an enormous pile of questions here, and within an hour, I'm not sure we're going to get through all of them, but we'll certainly best shot. So I guess panel members' emphasis is on concise. I think that's the way to go. So let's just begin then. Let's begin in the same order as we began. Right, in that case, let's move to ladies first. Rosemary. There have been a couple of questions regarding your comments on the universal basic income. Let's put them all together. How would Scotland finance a universal basic income? Is it time for the re-evaluation of the productive value of labour? And is UBI a stepping stone on the way to the provision of basic living rights, water, housing, etc.? And that's the same question. How would we finance a UBI?
So I have thought about this, and I'm also an advocate of land reform and land value tax. You can move you can shift your land to hide the taxman, so it's a great way of making sure we know who's responsible. If we could get every piece of land on the land registry, which of course it still isn't. But if we did that, you can pretty much do away with all other taxation, and that would still allow you to pay for a universal basic income. And the one that a lot of people in the room might enjoy is I would also advocate doubling our pension. Yeah. Given it is the worst in Europe, and in fact it's wider than just Europe. So I think there are ways of doing it. You do have to tackle the whole taxation system though in order to deal with it, because if you're genuinely using UBI, everyone in the country receives the income. So obviously if people are already on a very high earning job, it means they're just getting this additional funding. So you need to review your taxation system in order to claw back from the people who already have a lot of money, and in that way you're redistributing it to the people perhaps who have less. Another real benefit economically of that, of course, is that the people who are on the lowest incomes typically have to spend that money just to keep going. So the money that we spend as a government goes into that sector, and then they're spending it, so it's coming back into the economy and reused. So yeah, land reform pays for that and also doubles our pension.
Okay, thank you very much. Those questions came from Lucille and David Younger. We also had, let's move on to another question here. This one's for Roger, and we're getting out of it now, Roger. Reference stock exchange. One, oh gosh, there's a whole book here from Jim Fairley.
Can we just do one at a time?
Yeah, well, yes, or I'll read them out and you can rattle through them as quick as you can. Who defines what level of ethical practice is acceptable to trade? Being by ethical, are we thinking environmental, living wage payers, child friendly, or is it a suite of things? Let's stop there. Let's go with that.
Okay. Well, thanks very much for the question. It's really good. But how are these things going to be defined? There will be a special panel set up of experts to use international standards, some of which are only now developing. I mentioned the entrepreneur who's leading this in Scotland by the name of Thomas Carruthers has very recently, when he was attending an event in Washington, has been invited onto two of the OECD's working groups precisely to identify good international practice in matters connected to this. So the intention is that this will not be some cosy little group internally that finds things to suit ourselves. It will be wide-ranging, it will be related to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and it will operate to best international practice, and there will be an independent panel set up to effectively oversee to make sure that those standards are upheld in the operation of the Scottish Stock Exchange. But I think, but it was a very important question, because there is far too much in our society going on that's known by the term of greenwashing. And by that I mean people giving lip service to it, that they maybe say, well, we contribute so much to build some trees somewhere to offset our carbon footprint and things like that. So the intention is not to give a free ride for people who just want to engage in greenwashing. The intention is to have proper, adjudicated international standards that those engaged in this enterprise will be connected to. What was the second part of the question? Sorry, I forgot.
By ethical, are we talking environmental, living wage?
Yeah, right. Basically, we're talking of a whole suite of measures. The best way to think about it at the moment is, if you look at the whole range of United Nations Development Goals, it does involve environmental standards, but it involves far more than that. It involves dealing with issues of social impact and the like, it involves gender equality and the like. So that, for example, the Scottish Stock Exchange has already committed itself that its board will be gender balanced. They've already recruited the senior executives of it, the whole team, the majority of whom are women, and that has been a deliberate strategy. So basically, if you're going to establish something and make the claim, this is going to make an ethical difference, and it's going to be modern, you have to practice what you preach. And so I'm very supportive of the actions that the entrepreneur has taken in that regard.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Thanks, Jim, for that. There's quite a few questions. Let's go for this one. Let's move here. Right. We'll move just down the line here, Michelle. From Walt Hopkins. Can we start all over with banks that are based in and funded by the people of Scotland? Why keep RBS at all? Well, I'm probably going to say something a bit unpopular here, because people work there, and it's their jobs and their livelihoods. Perhaps sometimes we're a bit too romantic, and I, in general terms, I'm often quoted of saying that we need to be audacious and we need to be ambitious and really drive real change, and independence could be a key trigger for that. However, we need to balance that against making sure that we don't make our fellow people poorer as a result. RBS clearly has a great deal of issues. We know that, and I've talked openly about that, but there are many thousands of people that continue to work there, so I don't agree with that we should just get rid of RBS. It's people's livelihoods at the end of the day.
No, but the wider question, can we get banks based in and funded by the people of Scotland?
I think the question says, can we start all over again in banking? There can